Could everybody please stand for the arrival of their honors? Please be seated. Thank you. Your Honor, did you want to say a few words to start us off, or should we just go right into the proceedings? You're going to say a few words? I am, yeah. Okay.
What an auspicious looking crew we have. I'd like to begin by respectfully acknowledging the province of Newfoundland and Labrador as the ancestral homelands of many diverse populations of Indigenous peoples who have contributed to 9,000 years of history, including the Beothuk on the island of Newfoundland. Today, this province is home to diverse populations of Indigenous and other people. We also acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of the Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit. Land acknowledgements show respect to the first people of our country, and it is our responsibility not only to show this respect, but also to encourage Newfoundlanders and Labradorians to learn about the full history of this land. These are acts of reconciliation, and we all have a role to play. Carl and I have learned a lot in the past year about reconciliation. It is important for us to promote this learning and to share with you some of the learnings. By listening and learning, we develop empathy. Empathy is critical to reconciliation, and we need to talk about it with our children and grandchildren to grow empathy. We need to help shape a worldview that includes balance, respect for our land and for each other through the choices and the decisions we make, like our Indigenous partners. We need to think 7 generations ahead, which means we need to make things better for those coming behind us. And good afternoon and welcome to Government House. A welcome as well to the people watching online today. Government House is a place that has seen so much history, and it's a place where we celebrate success. Today, we gather for both. 100 years ago, the tireless efforts of women involved in the suffrage movement finally achieved success. A story that generates such pride in all of us. The right to vote and to hold public office was granted in 1925. Today, thanks to Karen Carroll and her organization, we will listen to stories of that struggle and stories of women who faced great challenges. Not everyone was supportive, we know that, but the women were truly resilient. They leaned in, they were vigilant, not to mention extremely persistent. Recently, Government House held a number of events and honors in the Colonial Building just next door. One of these ceremonies was the awarding of the King's Counsel designation to deserving lawyers, each of them. Of that group, 7 of the 12 were women, and I couldn't help but wonder, as I looked out at them, how many of them would have been members of the Ladies' Reading Room, located on 158 Water Street over 100 years ago. This reading room, we have come to learn, was crucial to the development of the women's suffrage movement. In the Colonial Building, standing there, I was struck. What must it have been like all those years ago? Those women coming back year after year after year and advocating for suffrage and getting turned down year after year after year. And as I look out here today, I wonder the same. I think I know the answer to this one. How many of us gathered here and at home would be involved as much as we possibly could. Hands up. The ladies' reading room was about sharing information and stories. And Newfoundland and Labrador has an incredibly rich history and pride of place and identity that's embedded in just who we are. Storytelling passes on our heritage and our history in a wonderful and very personal way. Today, we will hear some of those stories, and we look forward to them. And we will also hear the perspectives of a historian and a filmmaker and a performing artist. I'm very much looking forward to hearing these stories this afternoon. And I'm also very delighted to notice that in our audience, we have so many women who are able to regale us with their own stories of those days. And we'll get to hear those a little later. And I want to say a special welcome to Margot Reid and to our fabulous and filterless Kathleen Nolan.
Thank you, Your Honor, for those words. I am Karen Carroll, and St. John's Storytelling is the organization that has been we're very grateful to be here today. We're a small registered not-for-profit organization. We started in 2004. Some of our founding members are in the room. And to my knowledge, and I stand to be corrected, this is the first time that we've ever been able to hold an event at Government House, which is wonderful to be here. So thank you for that. We really appreciate your kindness, Your Honors, for allowing us to come share stories on this particular topic, which is, a celebration. Like you said, it is a celebration. I want to note that these were, when everything happened 100 years ago, it was women in Newfoundland, as far as I know. It wasn't women in Labrador. I don't believe they got the right to vote till much later. But it was women in Newfoundland, and they worked for decades, literally. They did work for decades to do this. So I will start with a poem or a recitation, or actually it is a song, but we're going to sing it later. You will all have lyrics, just let you know that at the end there's going to be a little participation in it. We will lead you. But it's Bread and Roses, which actually, Bread and Roses is a quote from an American suffrage activist, Helen Todd. She gave a speech in 1911. She talked about bread and roses. So bread is what you need to feed yourself, obviously, and clothe yourself, and the basic things of life. The roses are the beauties in life, the art, and all those lovely things in life. So it became a poem by James Oppenheim, and subsequently became a really strong, sort of message in the labor movement and also in the suffrage movement. So I thought I would share the lyrics or the prose of that poem. This is kind of an adapted version of it to start. As we go marching, marching in the beauty of the day, 1,000,000 darkened kitchens, 1,000 mill lofts grey, are touched with all the radiance that a southern sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we go marching, marching, we battle too for men, for they are in this struggle, and together we shall win. Our days shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we go marching, marching, unnumbered women dead go crying through our singing their ancient call for bread. Small art and love and beauty, their drudging spirits knew. Yes, it is bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we go marching, marching, we're standing proud and tall, for the rising of the women means the rising of us all. No more the drudge and idler, 10 that toil where one reposes, but the sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses. So important to note that poem and that song originated in the United States, but women across all kinds of borders and boundaries shared their experiences. They supported each other in the struggle for suffrage. I think that's a really important message today in our world, right? That's good to note that women worked, in different countries. They supported each other, they helped each other, they communicated, and they helped build their movements in each country. So it was 100 years ago. Actually, the legislation according to my research, and the historians may correct me, but March 9th, 1925 was when the actual vote was taken by the legislature, and it was a unanimous vote. But by the time all the procedural things happened, it was actually April 3rd, 1925, that it was actually a law. And that, of course, marked a turning point for women and for all people, really, because it just, moved us forward in so many ways. So the first person I'm going to call up as a teller today is Dr. Terry Bishop Sterling. So Dr. Bishop Sterling is a professor of history at Memorial University. And St. John's Storytelling crossed paths with her last year because we had funding from the Berlin Trust and also from Year of the Arts through ArtsNL to do a very special project on gathering oral stories of World War I. And we were very successful in gathering over 100 previously untold stories. We now have them in an archive, a permanent archive at Mon Folklore Department. And we have also done a podcast series, and we're about to release very soon a Rogers Cable series, a 2-part Rogers Cable series. So it's been a beautiful, fantastic project. And so we crossed paths with Dr. Terry Bishop Sterling because as we delved more and more into the information about World War I and the stories of World War I, we realized it was hard to find the women's stories because they weren't necessarily recorded. But brilliantly, and thanks be to God, we had people like Dr. Terry Bishop Sterling, among others, who really researched the women of that time and curated their stories. And so this is how we crossed paths. And of course, being a historian, Terry did extensive work around the women of that era. So we've asked her today to come and bring us some historical context on all that happened 100 years ago. Welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. Start with just a little personal story. When I was an undergraduate student and I took a course in Newfoundland history, I decided that I would like to write about the women's suffrage movement. This was before Marion's film, before Margot's book. And so after a little while, I went to my professor, Dr. Jim Hiller, and said, I can't do this topic. I have to change it because there's nothing written on it. And to his credit, he told me that was just a good reason to do it. And so I delved into newspapers as I could with the skills that I had at that time and produced a paper that I think I'm most proud of my undergrad writing. And so today, he gave me a B+, by the way, but I'm over it. So today my work is very much drawing on the work of Margot, Marion, Hilda Chalk Murray, my friend Heidi Coombs, who's here, Nancy Forrestal, Jessie Chisholm, and so many others who've filled in so much of our story. In 1979, folklorist Hilda Chalk Murray took the name of her book on women's work in Outport, Newfoundland, from an Outport fisherman who acknowledged that women's work in the household-based inshore fishery contributed more than 50% of the value of the product. In addition to helping make the fish, Outport women kept houses and clothing clean, grew food in the family garden, prepared meals, sometimes up to 5 a day for their fishermen, bore and cared for their children, nursed their own sick as well as their neighbors, made clothes, and stretched the family's always tight budgets to enable the households to thrive. These women had no say in the laws that governed them. In St. John's and other larger towns, young single women contributed to their families through domestic, clerical, retail, and factory work. Married women sometimes also took on wage work outside the home, especially if their husbands were unemployed, underemployed, or unreliable. More commonly, however, they contributed economically with unseen work. Of course, their labors to keep their homes, but also taking in boarders, providing laundry services, finishing garments for factories as home workers, and caring for other women's children. In 1890, responding to a reporter's question about how he supported his family on his very meager wages, a St. John's longshoreman replied, "Formerly, the seal fishery was good. This, with nurse tending by my wife, got me through till some of the family were grown up. I have 2 sons in the States and they send money. A daughter who lives with us is a tailoress." Yet the myth of the male breadwinner who alone supported his family and the needs of women that prevailed, and the needs of women homemakers and workers was thought to be of secondary importance, and their political and legal rights properly left to their husbands and fathers. Women at all levels of society contributed their time and talents through their churches and through charitable organizations to support institutions like churches and schools, as well as the needy in their communities. Middle and upper class women were expected to support their husbands' careers, but also to lead good works in their communities. After the terrible fires of 1892 destroyed so much of St. John's, women stepped up in the fundraising efforts to rebuild public buildings, particularly the churches. Writing to her sister, future suffrage leader Armine Gosling complained about the interminable fairs, bake sales, etc., which she was obliged to help organize, as her husband was the chair of the fundraising efforts to rebuild the Anglican Cathedral. After handing over a huge sum of $5,600 after a women's bazaar, she mused. This is always one of my favorite quotes. "I find myself philosophizing over the position of women in connection with such matters, and reflecting on the willingness with which we women support so loyally an institution that encourages our work and takes with eagerness all the money we can earn, but denies us any voice in its expenditure, and relegates us to the outer darkness as far as having any share in formulating its policies is concerned. But isn't that always the way of the powers that be, both mundane and ecclesiastical, where women are concerned?" Women in Newfoundland then contributed in countless ways to the survivals of their families, their communities, and thus their country. But were not seen as able to take part in the rational, thoughtful work of running the country or making its laws. They were not even seen fit to decide who might do so. As early as the 1880s and 90s, women began campaigning for the right to vote. The 19th century campaigns were closely tied to the fight for prohibition. Women leaders of the time publicized the damage done to women and children by drunken husbands and fathers. Their demand for the vote was often portrayed as giving women a tool to fight back and bring in laws limiting or even prohibiting the sale of alcohol. So the vote was seen really as a means to an end rather than simply as a right in itself. Of course, this coupling of suffrage and prohibition was limiting and likely antagonized many would-be supporters, both men and women, and also was very divisive on religious grounds. Catholics seeing it as a Protestant plot to deprive the good Catholic working man of a drink at the end of the day. After the defeat of the suffrage bills in the early 1890s, the movement waned, though both individuals and groups continued to work to improve women's lot. So things just kind of moved into the background. Just as a couple of examples, in 1910, Janet Miller successfully fought a law society ban on women studying the law. Working class women struck several times to try and improve their working conditions, and in 1918 formed a ladies' branch of the Newfoundland Industrial Workers Association. Women leaders continued to meet and learn and talk with one another and with feminists internationally. In 1909, after being banned from the Methodist Hall debates, Armine Gosling, Myra Campbell, Adeline Browning, May Kennedy, and other women's leaders started the Ladies' Reading Room and Current Events Club, which Your Honor mentioned. They opened a meeting room on Water Street. Women could go there to meet, read, debate, learn, and plan. They kept the supplies with newspapers and with literature about the women's movement internationally. Now, with a room of their own, they reinvigorated their movement. They began to write letters to the newspapers and hold debates on many issues of concern, including suffrage. This was a time when the radical British suffragists were taking desperate, violent, often illegal measures to have their voices heard. While the local women's leaders never contemplated going so far, they did find themselves defending the injustices behind some of the radical actions. Ultimately, this led to the formation of the Women's Franchise League in 1920, the organization which would spearhead the final campaign. Because of the date, some people used to think that World War I really sparked the suffrage movement in Newfoundland, but as we know, it went back quite a few decades then. Some of its leaders, such as younger ones like Agnes and Janet Miller, were at least second-generation suffragettes. Scholars of the women's movement sometimes talk about two different arguments in favor of women's enfranchisement. What is sometimes called social or maternal feminism, considered more conservative arguments, and the more radical equal rights argument. Newfoundland feminists were individuals, and some prioritized one argument over the other. But I think it's fair to say that overall, both kinds of beliefs pervaded the movement. This statement, A Woman's Mission by Fannie McNeil, tireless secretary of the Franchise League, this picture of her next door, demonstrates the maternal feminist argument that women, by their special nature, should be able to bring their maternal caring to the wider needs of society. Quote, her womanly sympathies go out into the world. Wherever she sees wrong, her instincts bid her put it right, and the young, the aged, the deformed, and all who suffer come under her motherly care, for women are naturally all mothers. This somewhat limiting argument contrasts with arguments in speech by Armine Gosling and others, which stress that women, as citizens, had the right to vote and to have a say in the laws which govern them. Some of the arguments, for example, were presented in a famous speech by Armine Gosling as early as 1912. Women should have the vote because, this is a quote, most laws affect them as much as they do men, and some laws affect them more, and they are now framed without consulting the persons they're intended to benefit. Because people who have to obey laws should have a voice in making them. This is the foundation of all liberty. Because men, no matter how well-meaning they may be, never have made and never can make suitable and just laws for women. We hear this down south now. No law concerning women has ever passed the House of Commons that has not borne the unmistakable stamp of such legislation. Because no class or race or sex can have its interests properly attended to in the legislation of a country unless it is represented by direct suffrage. Women workers, for example, have learned that unless you have political power, you cannot get industrial justice. Finally, I want to talk about the impact of World War I, which is where I've done most of my research on women getting a vote. As said earlier, the war certainly did not create the women's suffrage movement. But they had not had a lot of converts by the time the war started. It undoubtedly politicized more women. It gave the suffragettes a network of potential allies and a way to communicate across the country. And it changed the minds of many men who felt grateful to women for their tremendous support of the war effort. So it was not the catalyst for the movement, but it was a major turning point, which helped lead to the ultimate victory in 1925. During the war, at least 100 Newfoundland women went overseas to care for servicemen as nurses or members of the Voluntary Aid Detachment, VAD, doing various domestic jobs, driving ambulances, and working in military hospitals as nurses' aides. But the most common way that Newfoundland women mobilized to support the war effort was through a countrywide voluntary organization. On the 31st of August 1914, Margaret Davidson, wife of Governor Walter Davidson, called a public meeting in St. John's. The 700 women who attended formed the Women's Patriotic Association, the WPA, to provide clothing, cigarettes, and other comforts for the country's servicemen. The first executive included many of the suffrage leaders. While the WPA work was directed by elite women in the capital and organized in the most elite house in the country, the organization spread quickly. By the war's end, there were 219 WPA branches and over 15,000 members spread throughout the country. And this would be a network of communication that the suffragettes could use later. WPA work did not challenge women's societal role, but drew on traditional skills such as knitting, sewing, and caring for the sick. Branches were set up in the outports and company towns by appealing first to teachers and wives of clergymen, doctors, and merchants, but the membership crossed class and religious lines. This was also very important to the suffrage movement. It had been a problem in the 1890s. Rural groups raised money through donations and initiatives such as entertainments and bake sales. They sent the money to state headquarters in St. John's for material to be sewn or knitted into items for the servicemen. Over the next 4 years, the WPA distributed socks, pajamas, shirts, bed jackets, and pillows. They also began a tobacco fund, and at Christmas provided gifts for the men. They made bandages and supported hospital beds through the Red Cross branch, and they supported recruiting efforts. The local suffrage movement does not appear to have been at least openly divided on the issue of supporting the war. The WPA Red Cross Committee also founded a tuberculosis rehabilitation camp for returned war veterans and worked with other charitable groups to support a soldiers' convalescent home. WPA headquarters, as I said, was located in the most prestigious home in the colony, and its executive was drawn from some of its wealthiest women. But the organization crossed traditional barriers between religions, town and outport, and class. By war's end, Newfoundland women had raised in cash and supplies about $500,000, estimated today at about $6.5 million. This accounted for almost half of all funds raised for the country's war effort. During the war, suffragettes moved their franchise demands to the back burner, but followed the advice of the International Suffrage Association and used women's war time contributions as evidence that they deserved the vote. During the war, the influential WPA leaders widely publicized the organization's activities throughout the country. Local newspapers printed accounts of meetings and lists of money and goods donated. One major way the suffragettes kept their cause in the forefront was through their publication, The Distaff. It's a picture of that in the room next door as well. Produced to publicize women's war effort and to raise funds for the Red Cross. It published short stories and poems which told of lovers parted and mothers' broken hearts, but also of women's pride in their brave lads and in their daughters who were in Europe nursing servicemen. While primarily designed to support the war effort, the Distaff also advanced the cause of women's movements, both implicitly and explicitly. It published accounts of women's community work, such as their efforts for the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and their work for the Cowan Mission, whose members operated a convalescent home adjacent to the General Hospital. Through photographs and stories, the Distaff highlighted the achievements of young women who were excelling in academia and lauded the nurses and VADs serving at home and overseas as heroines. In the 1916 edition, WPA secretary and suffrage leader Armin Gosling, whose own daughter was overseas driving an ambulance, wrote a piece on women's war work and the advancement of the franchise. As I said, unlike the situation in England and parts of Canada, the suffragettes were not openly, at least, divided by the war. Most seemed able to reconcile their support for the conflict with their feminist values and goals, including anti-war sentiment. By at least 1925, women who had worked hard to support the Allied war effort once again argued that a vote for female suffrage was a vote for peace. By the end of the war, St. John's newspapers, prominent unions such as the Longshoremen's Protective Union, several politicians, and the Great War Veterans Association, among others, all maintained that women had now deserved the right to vote. Most arguments favoring suffrage were based on a conservative domestic feminist view. Women had proven themselves worthy of the vote and would improve political life by bringing innate motherly traits and skills to public life. Unfortunately, a severe post-war economic crisis and the election of a determined anti-suffrage Prime Minister, Richard Squires, delayed the suffragettes' victory until 1925, when women over the age of 25 on the island received the vote. You're right that women in Labrador did not have the vote. Labrador did not have any representation at all, so men in Labrador did not vote either at that point. It's impossible to know what women talked about as they sat and cut material or knit the interminable piles of socks during the war. But shared worries, grief, and work undoubtedly strengthened bonds. In the post-war years, when some politicians argued that the suffrage leaders were outsiders and society ladies who did not speak for the real women of Newfoundland. The Franchise League used the network established by the WPA to gather 20,000 names on a petition of women demanding the vote. This petition was signed by women all over the country. The war raised feelings of citizenship and entitlement among Newfoundland women and left them not only willing to work to better their country, but expecting a voice in how that country's future would be shaped. In their first countrywide opportunity to vote in 1928, 90% of eligible women did so. Clearly, whatever Prime Minister Squires and other opponents believed, the real women of Newfoundland, and they were all real women, were happy to, at last, have their voices heard. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Terry. I think it's so important for us to be reminded of the historical context, because until I started reading about it, I didn't know. I wasn't taught that. And so many of us weren't taught that. So I think it's important that we can frame it in that way, because it's really important, I think, to understand that. So thank you so much for bringing that to us today. And I know I read somewhere stories of women after the right to vote, came in, being over the age of 25. Buying anything, piece of property they could, a shed, an outhouse, anything that could say that they had the right to vote, because they just wanted to do it so badly. So I think those are also really important stories that they were determined to do this, right? And the fact that they used that network that they created during the war, they were so smart. They were ingenious to figure a way around what they couldn't get over or under, they had to go around. And that's exactly what they did. And so now I want to thank you, Terry, for that. And I want to introduce Marion. Marion Frances White was born and raised in Carbonear, as I was, by the way. Her family was 12 kids, and mine was 8. We were slightly different eras, so we never crossed paths at that time. But her family would have known my family, and some of her crowd would have gone to school with my crowd. So, there's that. Anyway, Marion has spent her professional career as an author, a documentary maker, a researcher, a poet, an advocate for women's rights. And her most recent book, In Her Glory, which I highly, highly recommend, is a beautiful book. And it's stories of her childhood in Carbonear, and lots of stories about her mother, her father too, but largely of her mother. And Marion was the creative force behind a documentary film made about 25 years ago on the women's suffrage movement in Newfoundland and Labrador. And I think she's going to share a little snippet of that with us today. So welcome, Marion. We're so glad to have you along. Okay.
How wonderful to, I'm just going to adjust your mic, my dear. You got to be able to hear you.
Thank you, Your Honors, for this wonderful opportunity. I am honored. And we are going to, first of all, see just 5 minutes of my docudrama about the untold story of the suffragists of Newfoundland, and get to see the early part of the movement. And then I will tell you a little bit about the other part, if that works for everyone here. Okay.
As we go marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 pillows gray, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses.
Situated in the North Atlantic, at the most eastern point in North America, lies the great island of Newfoundland. England's first colony in the New World. Newfoundland's vast cod fishery fed the British Empire and trained its navy from the 1500s. But settlement was discouraged in this rugged and bountiful place. Chimneys and women were forbidden. Both flourished. Life was unforgiving in the North Atlantic. Women did hard work alongside men to survive and to build the country. And by the 1850s, the country of Newfoundland was a self-governing dominion in the British Empire. But social conditions were often desperate. Rum was cheap and public drunkenness common. In the capital city of St. John's alone, there was a public liquor house for every 66 men, women, and children. Men and boys were often paid in alcohol in exchange for work. As a result, countless families were living in dire poverty. By the end of the century, conditions had not improved greatly. Epidemics were common. Child mortality was high. It was women who voluntarily did almost all the social work with the starving, the orphans, the widows, and they wanted change in the liquor laws. Women believed if they could vote, they would reform lax liquor laws and put an end to public drunkenness and wife and child abuse. In 1890, they established the Women's Christian Temperance Union in Newfoundland. Members of the WCTU, like young Maria Williams, were among the first women to speak before a mixed audience.
It is a well-known fact that women are the greatest sufferers by strong drink. And if there is any enjoyment in it, it is the men who have it, because they are enjoying the warmth and comfort of the gilded saloon. The poor woman is often found freezing over the fireless stove, or listening to the cries of her poor, hungry, cold, ragged children, and not knowing the moment she will receive the blow from the wretch she is forced to call husband.
In 1891, during a period of particular economic and social unrest in Newfoundland, members of the Women's Christian Temperance Union marched to the House of Assembly in St. John's, demanding the right to vote in local liquor laws. The fashionable Lady Jeanette Forward was their patron and led the march. With her was the fiercely outspoken Jessie Murray Owen and the future WCTU president, Emma Peters. These women were among the first feminist voices in Newfoundland. Jessie stated their case.
Women with years of toil in the field of reform have learned that a power we have not is needed to put in practical operation the principles we believe in. That power is the vote.
In her book, Where Once Our Mothers Stood, We Stand, historian Margot Dooley writes that few who marched that day in 1891 would live to see their dream of women's suffrage fulfilled. It would take 34 years for this outrageous notion to become politically acceptable.
Thank you. It really moves me every time I see that opening and see so many wonderful actresses and actors that took part in making this film. The next part of the film, of course, will go more into the dramatizing of the second wave of the women's suffrage movement. But I'll tell you a little bit about the backstory of making the film. As you can tell by now, the story is about the 35-year struggle by a group of women to win the right to vote. And this docudrama came about over almost a 10-year period. I didn't initially set up to make a film, but to rather find a way to include more women in the study of Newfoundland and Labrador history. The medium of film appeared to be the most
concise and interesting way to accomplish this. However, little did I know all the obstacles that I would have to face in the fledgling film industry in this province, and to have to convince the financial powers in Canada that this was a story worth telling took several years. But going back to the 1990s, when I was compiling and publishing an annual agenda book called A Woman's Almanac, Voices from Atlantic Canada and originally from Newfoundland, Labrador, the almanac served as a means to acknowledge and celebrate many contributions women had made to our culture and our political past. As I continued to research information for this annual agenda book, I came across the names of several Newfoundland women who had accomplished a great deal in their lifetime. However, within the context and mandate of the almanac, which was largely to celebrate current women who were still alive so that they could enjoy the accolades, I always kept room for just one or two stories of women from our past. So I was limited there to how much I could reveal. Over time, the mounds of archival correspondence, newspaper articles, and a few photos of these women surfaced, and their movement to win the right to vote, it became so compelling to me that I put aside the annual almanac to focus on writing the film script, The Untold Story. I wanted to hear the voices of these early suffragists. And I wanted to recreate some of their moments through the talents of some of Newfoundland's wonderful and finest actors, from Ruth Lawrence and Janice Spence, who's no longer with us, to Greg Malone and Pete Soucy and Benny Malone. But the biggest question that inspired me in my research was why? Why had I not heard of Fanny McNeil? Why had I not heard of Vermeen Gosling, May Kennedy Goodrich, Julia Salter Earle? They are not in the history books I learned at school, or in any writing that I could find on the province, until finally Margot Dooley wrote and published her fabulous book, Where Once Our Mother Stood, We Stand. My hat endlessly goes off to Margot, who's here today. Margot has a second book coming out, and I can't wait to read it, on the suffrage movement. And I also have to say that many of you, I hope all of you know, Margaret Dooley, her niece, and she has just published a fabulous book about the life of her niece, Margaret Dooley. So I thank you again for that as well. Back to this story. As I said, the more information I found about these women, the more I realized I was unearthing something of vital importance to our knowledge of who we are. The film's purpose is not only to document a movement to achieve a right that most of us today take for granted, but also to continue in the vein of celebrating women's achievements. Most of the women you encounter in the early part of the film, beginning around 1891, they did not live to see enfranchisement passed in the House of Assembly in 1925. It would be the task of their daughters and granddaughters to continue to struggle for equality. Indeed, some would argue that on many levels, the struggle for equality continues to this day. Writing The Untold Story was not as difficult as making the film, mostly to finance it. I did not want to have someone go back to me 5, 10 years, and here we are now 25 years later, and say, this could have been done in a better style, or you left this out. I really wanted it to live up to the expectations that those amazing women worked towards for that 35 years. Greg Malone, as the director, certainly helped me achieve that. But unlike a book that is very much a solo project until it involves publishers and later the reader, a film, no matter the genre, involves hundreds of people, and more specifically, several key people, including, as I mentioned, Greg and Paul Pope, who's no longer with us, Janice Ripley, Sandy Morris, who was our musical director, and the narrator of the film, Sonia Smits. The untold story offers the viewer a tangible glimpse of a significant political movement. In every society and culture, there remains many untold stories, and now that the suffrage victory has been told, perhaps others will be inspired to unearth more stories of Newfoundland and Labrador's distinctive, long and varied past. So the Untold Story docudrama highlights an event that led to women winning the right to vote. The docudrama genre was ideal for this film because it made use of archival footage, the limited photos, and many published letters, as well as dramatizing key events. Through this combination of styles, the story reveals an incredible period in Newfoundland history: great social struggles, temperance, devastating fires, the Great War, the privileged, and the downtrodden. The text and most of the dialogue are taken from archival research and original documents. It is a story that reveals remarkable strength and determination of women and offers insight into Newfoundland's political and cultural past. Through the film, a rich and little-known part of Newfoundland's history unfolds. This is the story of a key group of women who took it upon themselves to see that women were given the same right to vote as men. It's a surprising tale of courageous women who fought a 35-year battle to win the right to vote. The film begins around 1890 and ends with their victory in 1925. While the focus of the docudrama is the story of women's struggle to get a succession of governments to take their demand for the right to vote seriously, it is also the story of men who supported their struggle and of those who stood in their way. There are many well-known events in Newfoundland history. Then there is the story, filled with facts and dates and backed up by speeches taken from the House of Assembly, records or Hansard files, newspaper clippings, personal letters, archival photos, and footage. Piece this together and a story emerges. A compelling story of how a group of women fought for the same thing they all believed in, and they eventually won. Newfoundland, as England's first colony, was greatly influenced culturally by its mother country, Great Britain. The large steamers that docked on the waterfront in St. John's brought trade and often took away passengers destined for London, England. It was not uncommon for women to accompany with their teenage daughters or sons who were going off to finish their education in London. Often they returned with new ideas and many opinions on politics and a new way of life that they saw there. Public suffrage meetings were on the rise on the streets of London. The famous Pankhurst sisters of London were fighting on their home front for their right to vote. News of their militant acts were in the news daily. Young women returned home to Newfoundland. They were now well educated, but eye-opened and ready to share their experiences that they had abroad with family and friends at home. This great need for the right to vote was largely influenced, as you were saying, by the lax liquor laws that were here at that time. Child mortality was high, and by voting to repel lax liquor laws, women would help put an end to deplorable working situations. It was women who voluntarily did almost all the social work with the starving, the poor, widows, and they wanted to say in how they were governed. Their first big task will be to convince government that they had the support of thousands of Newfoundlanders. But several events influenced the closing years of the 19th century and the struggle for enfranchisement. First of all, the outspoken leader of the early movement, Jessie Mary Ullman, left Newfoundland with her new husband, Nils Ullman, from Montreal. This marked the end of the first wave of suffrage movement in Newfoundland. However, as Jessie's steamer sailed out to St. John's Narrows, another woman was making a name for herself in St. John's. That woman was Irene Gosling. I can hardly say her name without. She brought an incredible strength to this province. She came from Waterloo, Quebec, to take up the position of principal of the Church of England Girls' School in St. John's, and she later married the mayor of St. John's, Gilbert Gosling. Together they became a positive force in St. John's society. Armine and the woman she would soon meet, Fanny McNeil, would lead the second wave of the women's suffrage movement. I'm delighted that in a few short months, a monument will be unveiled to celebrate Armine Gosling, and I thank all the women and Jen Dion and Margot who have been spearheading this now for a number of years. The struggle for the vote was interrupted by the Great Fire of 1892 that virtually destroyed the city of St. John's. But women put aside their issues and under the leadership of Armine worked tirelessly over the next decade to raise funds to replace the devastated infrastructure. However, as you also pointed out, they had no say in how that money could be spent. This inequality would further motivate suffragists to demand the right to vote. The massive war effort that happened gave them position and power. With the war finally over, women gradually got back to the issue of suffrage and organized themselves into the Women's Franchise League. By 1918, suffrage had been won in Great Britain and appeared imminent in the United States. By now, most provinces in Canada had gained suffrage except Quebec, which did not win suffrage until 1940. Women organized a major publicity blitz of St. John's and surrounding areas. The goal was to collect signatures on this petition all across Newfoundland. Suffragists sent a string of letters to all the newspapers, motivating delegations to work towards the united cause of women's suffrage. Finally, as we know, the Squires government fell, and the new government under Walter S. Munro, filled with suffrage supporters like Crosby and Cashin, quickly passed the Women's Franchise Bill in April 1925. The Newfoundland suffragists were immediately the toast of the International Alliance Convention held in Paris, France, and were eagerly celebrated around the world. At home, the Corner Brook Western Star neglected to even report on the passage of the bill. The Telegram duly reported that the Monroe government gave women suffrage. But as we know, no one gave suffrage to the women of Newfoundland. It was a hard-won victory, which the women celebrated at Smithville Hall in St. John's on April 21st, 1925. Now, I would like to finish. I realized this morning that in one of my early books of poetry, I wrote a poem called The Untold Story that encapsulates the whole movement. I'd like to read this, and I have dedicated this book to her honors, which I'd like to leave with you today. the untold story. We were a country, not a colony, when our mean goslings shouted, "We strive for freedom for ourselves and for all Newfoundland women." Then May Kennedy jumped from her seat and called out, "To the country of Newfoundland." That was before England called us to war, and before the streetcar frightened horses as they paced along Water Street, their carts full of daily passage. On the waterfront, settlers waved as steamers set sail for Halifax, London, Boston, New York. A winter chill did not daunt their resolve to find life abroad. Newfoundland was not a joke. It was a proud people. Whiteway, Bond, Squires, even a boy called Joey knew that. But so did Armene, May, Julia, Annie Mitchell, and Fanny McNeil. The dailies full of people settling scores, young domestics coming from the day to find their way up Prescott Street to the Griner homes along Rennie's Mill and Circular Road. Some never made it and sailed instead to Boston. But what is our history if it buries the past? If it does not tell of Maud Hutchings and Annie White debating the vote all the way up the brow? A mantra sounds over the waves. Come back from your maiden voyage, ancient women, shapeshifters, to claim our home, Newfoundland. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marion. That was so beautiful, and I'm really glad that you talked a lot about your docudrama. How does anybody? Because I have seen it, I absolutely loved it. I would love to see it again. It's about an hour long, give or take. How does one get to see your docudrama?
Yes.
So if you could just tell us that, maybe if you would come to the mic so people online can know that as well.
Thank you, thank you. In honor of the 100th anniversary of Women Getting the Vote, I have released the untold story on my YouTube channel. So any and all of you can just go on YouTube and type in my name and you will find the untold story.
Thanks for that, Mary, because I think it's really important for people to know how to access it, because it is such a fabulous piece of work, and to see all those actors portraying their parts and the different characters in history is absolutely amazing. I love it. It's just so wonderful. So thank you for your words today. Thank you for framing all of that in such a beautiful light. It's just lovely to know that that's there for anybody to see at any time. In this world wide web of ours that we're living in now. So we're going to take about a 10-minute stretch washroom break, everybody, just to kind of have a little break. It's now about 3:05, so we're back at 3:15 promptly, please. And washrooms are out and to your left, and up the hall the staff will direct you. So about 3:15 if we could come back to the room. Thanks very much. We'll just take a little pause. Take your little pause, take your little coffee break. We're just seating a few people there now. Just waiting to sort of get started. Welcome back, everybody. And I'm told that some people are having trouble hearing me. Rarely would anybody in my family say that they had trouble hearing me. I assure you of that. So what I'm going to say is myself and Anita Best are the next two people to speak. And maybe if someone could just move my phone there, Pam. That's on the seat. Thank you, Anita. Myself and Anita Best are going to be the next two to speak, and we are used to vocal mics. So we're going to make sure we're right on this vocal mic to make sure everybody can hear us. So welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a little stretch break, had a little chat. It's a great afternoon to do that. I'm going to introduce a woman now who needs no introduction in Newfoundland and Labrador, I can assure you of that. Anita Best was born on Mirasheen Island, and she has been singing and telling stories for many, many years. The first time I shared a stage with Anita was in July of 2018. It was July 25th, actually. We were at the Rooms, and we were doing a show. It was called Drop Threads, Reading the Stories of Women Past and Present. I know because I have the poster dry mounted on my storytelling wall. That's how much of a hero Anita Best is to me, but to many people in the province. She's a tradition keeper of stories and songs, and she sings both in English and in French. And if I only knew half of what Anita Best forgot, my dear, I'd be the best storyteller in the world. Anyway, Anita, please join us and share some stories with us.
Well, thank you, everybody. And Muffet, can you hear me?
Yes, I
can. Excellent, perfect. So thank you, Your Honor. It's such a privilege to be here in Government House. I live right across the road now, so I can see your decorations and everything all through Christmas. They were absolutely beautiful. I must say, they were really beautiful. But so many women have been important in my life. Starting with my mother. I come from an oral culture where we only had like 2 books in the house. One of them was the Holy Bible, and the other one was a book my father brought back from Greenland for me to learn how to read by. It was called The Littlest Angel. And I don't know if any of you ever had that book, but so I'm used to listening to stories rather than reading them when I was growing up. And so many women have been important in my life, some of whom are here in this room now tonight, like Margot Dooley and Muffet Noling and Ruth Canny, who was worked really hard to bring our built heritage here in St. John's up to everyone's attention, and so many women. My teachers, as I came into St. John's to go to school, my first teacher was Violet Wilson out in Mirasheen Island. And my teachers here in St. John's were Millie Jeffers and Judy Gillingham and Grace Sparks. And Grace was really an inspiration to me, and many of you may remember her. There's a boat called after her now down in Bonavista Bay, a ferry called after Grace, which is amazing. And the struggles that Grace had to make her voice heard when she was running against Joey Smallwood in the elections. He actually did things like get people to drive a herd of sheep, a flock of sheep, underneath the parish hall where she was speaking. It made so much noise that she couldn't be heard, because there were no such things as microphones in some of these places. Now, to get back to Mirasheen, that's where I grew up. And the people who live in Mirasheen don't call it Mirasheen, they call it Mirashin. And the woman I'm going to tell you about today, her name was Kate Wilson. She was born in Brigus in March of 1892. And her family moved into Fox Harbour in Placentia Bay. That's near Placentia itself. And she eventually married a Mr. Bill Wilson when she was young. And when she was 18 or 19, she married Mr. Bill Wilson, and they moved to Marasheen. Mr. Bill Wilson was from Marasheen. And the first thing I'm going to tell you about her was that she lived with Mr. Wilson in a cove called Little Marasheen, down in Marasheen on the northern part of Marasheen. Marasheen is like two harbours. It's an island in the middle of Placentia Bay that's 21 miles long, and the southern end of it is where my family lived. And just over a little narrow neck of land is where Kate Wilson lived. And I want to tell you the story that she told me about her first child being born. She was very young. She told me 17, 18 years old maybe. And she was living in the house there, no electricity in those days, and the water had to be brought by buckets from the well. No running water, no electricity, no cars. You went everywhere by boat, and it was mostly either a rowboat, a rowing punt, or a make and break engine that people used in those days. And she got pregnant, of course, as a young wife, and her husband was in the woods. It was in the wintertime. He was in the woods cutting pit props, because it was just before the First World War. And he was in the woods cutting pit props and cutting some wood for the winter. And she was alone in the house because her husband's mother had gone off up the harbour to see somebody else, and there was no one else around. Everybody was busy with all their things. And all of a sudden she felt labor coming on. Now, there she is, a young woman alone, no telephones, no way to get in touch with anybody. She felt labor coming on. She didn't really quite know what it was. She told me she was a very, very young person. She didn't really know much about anything, but she listened to the women when she was growing up. And she thought, oh, well, this must be my time. And then her water broke. That made her very anxious because she wasn't sure what she was going to do. There's no nurses, no doctors around, living immersion at that time. And so she made herself ready. She went and sat down in a big rocking chair, and she waited. The contractions got stronger and stronger and shorter in between. And eventually, by herself, she got down on the floor on her hands and knees, and she had that first baby by herself, in the house by herself. And she said it was very painful, very painful. And some of you who've had children, like myself, will probably vaguely remember how painful it can be. And she had no episiotomy, she had no drugs, and so she had this baby by herself. And there she was with this baby, and it had a cord sticking out of it. And she suddenly remembered someone telling her some of the stories of the older women. They said, now the first thing to do is to cut the cord. So she got up with the baby in her arms. She walked over to the kitchen cupboard and got a pair of scissors and cut the cord. And then the placenta came out. She didn't know what it was. She thought maybe it might have been another child. But she was frightened to death. So she did her best. She went in and lay down on the bed with the baby. The baby seemed to be alive. It was crying. And she saw that, some women she talked about used to smack the baby on the bottom to get its voice coming. So she cleared away the mucus. She washed off the baby with a warm cloth. And she lay down on the bed with the baby. And when her husband came back, there they were in the bed, herself and a newborn baby. And so that experience made her want to share with other women, like help other women when they were having childbirth. And a couple of years after that, when the child was a little older, she persuaded her husband, Bill, to let her go to Placentia Cottage Hospital, which had started at that time. And there was a doctor from England in there called Dr. Collingwood. And Dr. Collingwood was offering a course to women who wanted to learn about midwifery. It was an 8-week course, I think. She told me, as far as she could remember, she told me that it was about 8 weeks long. Now, she wanted to do this course because she really thought, how wonderful is it going to be if I can help other women to deliver their babies? There was no midwife in Mershon at that time. The one who had been there before had passed away. So she spoke to her husband, and the course was being offered, as would happen in between June and July. Now, anyone who is a relative to a trap fisherman knows that that's the very busiest time of your year. And a woman in a fishing community, a woman had so much responsibility during that time. She had to look after a trap crew, sometimes 8 men, cook for them, wash for them, and as Terry Bishop Sterling said, sometimes 5 times a day, you'd have to make meals for these men. They get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they go out, using the rowing out or using an engine in a trap skiff to go out and set their net, and then come back in again around 11 o'clock, out again, back again, and then they'd be clearing away the fish. And they always had to be fed, and the men who were living with them there, who were helping with the fishery, had to be, their clothes had to be looked after and washed, and the sheets and everything else, and no running water, remember, no electricity, no washing machines or anything like that. So it was a very busy time of the year. So of course, her husband was a bit reluctant to let her go, but he must have loved her a great deal, because he allowed her to go and take this 8-week course with Dr. Collingwood in Placentia. And Kate Wilson became an amazing midwife. She delivered over her lifetime, as far as she remembered, and other people have told me as well, although we have no way of knowing exactly, over 600 babies, only one of which died. So 600 babies she brought into this world with a little bit of training she had from Dr. Collingwood in Placentia. And with the help, as she told me herself, of the Virgin Mary. Now, I'll tell you another story that she told me. The Virgin Mary was a very real person, Mrs. Kate. We called her Mrs. Kate. And I was very taken with her as a child because she could sing so well, but we'll get to that later on. But we used to go down to her house, my father and mother and me. I was the oldest child in our family, and we'd go down to her house on Sundays and listen to the stories. And of course, being a kid, you were told to be heard, be seen but not heard. So I picked up a lot of information being quiet when I was young. I found out a lot of really interesting things. Anyhow, I was more interested in her singing, but then I came later to find out what an amazing life she'd had. So she believed very strongly in the Virgin Mary. And she told me this is one reason why. In the early 1950s, just after I was born in 1948, apparently somebody came over from Toslow. And those of you who know Newfoundland songs will know Toslow is the place where you see 2 sunkers and you go in and then you go into the harbour. It's a very hard harbour to get into. So in the middle of the night, she heard a knock on the door, and they got up, and apparently some woman was in labour over in Toslow, which was across a stretch of water from where she lived in Mershon. And it was about 10 or 15 miles to go in a trap skiff. It was in the middle of the winter, it was cold, and the sort of in between freezing, in between freezing and thawing, where you get a lot of fog. Well, Placentia Bay is the place where they make the fog and they send it out to everywhere else. And so she got dressed up, she took her bag, she took a thermos full of tea, and she went off with this man who had come across the harbour in his trap skiff to bring her back to deliver his wife's baby. And they were going, and the man's compass suddenly started not working, didn't work. They couldn't see, she told me they couldn't see their hand in front of their face. She was sitting in the middle of the skiff, looking back towards the man who was sitting in the back, in the after cuddy, holding onto the tiller. Now those trap skiffs were about 20 feet long, with a deep middle, and they were operated by a tiller. The rudder was operated. They were steered by a tiller, a piece of an iron rod, usually an iron rod or a steel rod, stuck into the rudder itself, and the man would sit there and steer the boat. And so she was looking back towards the after cuddy, and the man couldn't tell where he was going. How was he going to get into Toslow? They said, Mrs. Kate, pray. He said, pray, because I don't know if I'm getting into Toslow tonight. And she prayed, and she said, as she was praying, she saw a vision of the Virgin Mary sitting next to that man in the back of the skiff. And the Virgin Mary put her hand out over his hand and guided him in through the harbor, into the fog where it was impossible to see anything. He didn't know where he was going, but she saw the Virgin Mary putting her hand on his hand. The Virgin Mary in her blue mantle and white gown, guiding him in through the harbor of Toslow, where she delivered the baby. In fact, she said they were twins. So can you imagine? That's one of the stories she told me about her delivery. Now, my mother told me when I was born, another story. She said, Mrs. Kate, the first thing she would do was say her prayers to the Virgin Mary, whom she believed was in the room with her. And my mother said, she told me to get up out of the bed and kneel up on my knees and hold on to the bedstead, she said. And she just rubbed my back and rubbed my back while the pains were coming, rubbed my back. And she'd be saying her prayers and humming little songs and being very quiet. And she said, that's how you were born. You were born with me kneeling down in the bed, and Mrs. Kate very quietly, calmingly massaging my back. And you were born that way. Now, I was born very small. I've since put on a lot of weight. But when I was born, I was only like 4 pounds or 5 pounds or something like that. So Mrs. Kate, because she felt it was in her authority, she decided that I might not live, so she baptized me as a Roman Catholic. Now, my family was Protestant, but and as soon as she could get Father Anthony Fine, to come over from the parish, the priest's house, the presbytery where he lived, she got him to baptize me too. So I was baptized twice in the Catholic Church. And of course, I did live, and 3 weeks later, my mother took me by boat down to Tax Beach to be properly baptized in the Anglican Church. But I believe that Mrs. Kate had already saved my soul, so I have a foot in both camps. But the fact was that the fact that she had such advanced techniques, and I spoke to many women in Merishon about the way she delivered babies, and they always wanted to have Mrs. Kate because she was so kind, she was so calm. She knew the Virgin Mary was in there with her in the room, and she knew that everything was going to be all right. So she delivered 600 babies. Only one of them died, and I think that baby was his mother was a diabetic, and the baby would have died anyway. It was sort of stillborn baby. Didn't live very long after it was born. But she regretted that baby until she died. The last time I spoke to her was before I went into the hospital to have my daughter in 1979. And she died in Placentia 4 days later. But I got a chance to call her from St. Clair's Hospital here. I called her in Placentia. She was in Placentia Hospital at the time. And I called her to tell her that I had a little girl, and I told her her name is going to be Kate. And it is. And so she passed away on the 9th of September. Now, Mrs. Kate did a lot of things in Mershing. She had gardens. But she grew beautiful roses. When we were singing Bread and Roses earlier, I was thinking about Mrs. Kate, and she had a lovely, lovely rose garden in front of her house. But she had 17 children of her own, 17, and she provided for all of them. Her husband had died by the time I was born, so I never met her husband, but she reared up those children by herself, and she used to make her own clothes. In fact, one other story that I'll tell you about Mrs. Kate was that the garden party, which was held in Mershon on August the 15th every year. This is the Lady Day, Feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The garden party was always held on the 15th of August. And the week before, months before, the women would all be sending away for their new dresses because you had to have a new dress and new shoes for the garden party. So the steamer didn't come, and the steamer didn't come. It was windy, it was stormy, and her 2 teenage daughters didn't have a new dress for the garden party. So what she did was went into the parlor, took down the velvet drapes that were in the parlor, beautiful velvet drapes, and made 2 lovely red velvet dresses for them to wear to the garden party. And one of them told me about it. She said, we were the most stylish girls at the garden party, and we were so glamorous. And they later married Americans and moved away to the States, where they're still glamorous, I'm sure. And Mrs. Kate also started a credit union in Mershon. She's so well respected and looked up to by the people of Mershon that they would trust her with their money. So she started a credit union, and I'm writing a little bit about her now, and I'm trying to find out more about her. But I'm going to close off this little bit because I don't want to keep you here all day with the first song that I learned from Mrs. Kate as a kid down in her parlor in these Sunday afternoons. And my father would sing songs, my mother would sing songs, and she'd sing songs. That was what the entertainment was in those days. And this is a bit of a long song, but I hope you'll enjoy it. Lord Bateman was a noble youth of a high degree. He shipped himself on board a vessel some foreign countries for to go see. He sailed east, he sailed west, until he came to Santa Fe, where he was taken bound in prison, until his life it became weary. Now this Turk had one only daughter, the fairest ever my 2 eyes did see. She dressed herself in her finest clothing, and swore Lord Bateman she would go see. Lord Bateman, have you houses and lands, and do Northumberland belong to thee? What would you give to any lady who out of prison could set you free? Oh yes, I have houses and lands, and half Northumberland belongs to me, and I'd freely give it to any lady who out of prison could set me free. She took him to her father's cellar. She gave to him the best of wine, and every drink she drank unto him. I wish, Lord Bateman, that you were mine. Well, 7 years we will make a promise, and 7 more will keep it strong. If you want wed with no other woman, sure I want wed with no other man. She took him to her father's harbor. She gave to him a ship of fame. Farewell, farewell, and farewell, Lord Bateman. I fear I never will see you again. Those 7 years being past and gone, and 7 more well known to me, and I packed up all my gay gold clothing, and swore Lord Bateman I would go see. And when I came to Lord Bateman's castle, 'twas boldly did I ring the bell. Who's there, cried that proud young porter, who rings so boldly and don't come in? Is this Lord Bateman's castle, I cried, and is his lordship now within? Oh yes, cried that proud young porter, he just has taken his new bride in. Go bid him send me a slice of cake, and a bottle of his best of wine, not to forget the fair young lady who did relieve him when sore confined. Away, away went that proud young porter, away, away, and away went he. And when he came to Lord Bateman's chamber, 'twas there he fell on his bended knee. What news, my proud young porter? What news dost thou bring to me? Well, there is one of the fairest ladies, the fairest ever my 2 eyes did see. And she have gold rings upon every finger, on her middle one, well, she wears 3. There's enough gold lace about her clothing that would buy half of Northumberland. And she bids you send her a slice of cake, and a bottle of his best of wine, not to forget the fair young lady who did relieve you when close confined. Lord Bateman flew into a passion. He split his sword in splinters 3, saying I'm wrong no more in no foreign countries, since my Sophia have followed me. Well, up then speaks a young bride's mother. She was never known to speak so free. Don't you disgrace my only daughter, though your Sophia have crossed the sea. Well, I own I made your daughter bride. She's none the better nor the worse for me. She came to me on a horse and saddle. She may go home in a coach and 3. Lord Bateman fixed another wedding, and with his heart so full of glee, saying I'll roam no more in no foreign countries, since my Sophia have crossed the sea. Lord Bateman. Thank you. And you can see there how in her own mind, she had the mother speak up. She had the mother speak up, even though she herself was the adventurous woman in the song who went to claim her betrothed. And that was how Mrs. Kate was. So I hope when I finish my writing about her that you'll be able to learn more about her. It's not very much. It's really hard to find information. And I'll have to go back through the archives and find out a bit more. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Anita. What can I say? Anita Best, everybody. I think I've committed the worst mistake ever as a storyteller. I have set myself up to follow Anita Best. This was I'm not a rookie, but it was a rookie mistake. Thank you so much. And this is why Anita's just a treasure to us as storytellers, because she's just so steeped in the storytelling and singing traditions of Newfoundland. So we've heard so many stories this afternoon of, resilience, activism, courage. It's just been a wonderful afternoon so far. I just want to share a couple little stories from my life now, and from my time. I worked for 35 years as a registered nurse, pretty well the whole time by the bedside. But prior to that, of course, I was born and raised, as I told you before, on the north side of Carbonear, in an old saltbox house. Now, my parents, they were very humble means. My father worked. My mother stayed home and raised the family. 8 of us in the family. I was number 6 in birth order of 8 surviving children. And we were raised in a Roman Catholic family. So, in our old saltbox house on the north side of Carbonear, you would have the wood coal and oil stove and day bed, like, most kitchens did then, and the kitchen table. And there were 2 pictures in our, in our kitchen. One was of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. It wasn't the Virgin Mary in the kitchen anyway. There was a statue of her somewhere in the house. The other one was of Joey Smallwood. That's the way it was. So my parents didn't have a great deal of education. They could read and write. And they were very, on top of current events, and they listened to the news and they read the newspaper. And we always discussed current events around the kitchen table in the nighttime. And there weren't many books in my house, but thankfully we had the local library and Mrs. Reinhardt, who was our librarian. I can't say my mother was a feminist. I really cannot say that. She was a very practical, down-to-earth woman who could make a dollar go really far, like many of our mothers, at that time. I was born in the 60s, so, it was hard. It was hard to make a living. It was hard to kind of keep things going. But she really ran the household, let me tell you, and her word was law, and you never crossed her. Because if you did, you would get the, now my young lady, I'll put a stop to your gallop, and you were finished. That was the end, right? When I graduated high school in 1979, I came to St. John's, and I did nursing at St. Clair's School of Nursing. And that's kind of where I met the activists who first started me on the road to leadership and activism. Not that I hadn't had that in school, because I had many wonderful teachers. I really did, but nursing was then, and probably still is, maybe a little bit less, but 98% women. So in the nursing profession, there were many role models for me as a nurse, and later on in my career, around 1988 or so, I became involved with the nurse union. But just to sort of give you a little snippet, I don't know if you know this about nurses. A lot of us are really bossy. It might be a newsflash for you. But I started work at the Janeway in the intensive care unit in 1982 when I graduated. And of all the nurses that I had worked with, because our 3rd year of nursing at that time was a service year, really, we worked on the floors. It was an intern year. So I had a fairly diverse experience. But when I went to ICU at the Janeway, part of the unit. I didn't work a lot in the neonatal half of the unit, but, I worked mostly in pediatrics, but I would often be, with those nurses as they cared for the little tiny babies that they looked after. And, one thing about nursing, we worked with all kinds of people from different cultures. There were people here, even then and before then, from all different cultures from all over the world. There were residents, nurses, different professionals. So one of the stories I remember from that early time, NICU nurses were really bossy. And I can tell you, they looked after those babies. They really did, because at that time, intensive care nursing was just really emerging. And they understood that you couldn't handle those babies very much. We had a lot of residents and fellows who were learning, how to be neonatologists, but they were guarding those babies. So in particular, we had this one resident from Saudi Arabia. This was in the early 80s. He had come to learn, and so of course in the middle of the night, most of the time it's the nurses who are there. And of course, this one particular night, we were just talking with him. He was a lovely young man. He was very, very overwhelmed by the culture of the nurses in Canada, in Newfoundland. He had never experienced this in his life, okay? And he was struggling, but he was very kind and friendly, and and he would share things about his life. He had just gotten married, and about his wife and things. So one night we were just having a bit of friendly kind of back and forth, and kind of telling stories from our lives, and he would kind of share with us. And this one night he said, one day the men of your country will rise up and demand their rights. This is how he felt. He was clearly overwhelmed by all these really bossy nurses. And he said, this is what he said one day. And one of the nurses, without missing a beat, she said, her name was Eva, well, Pete won't, because he's not allowed. And Pete was her husband. So nursing, for me, led me to leadership. And I joined the board of the Nurses Union in 1988. Her Honor was the vice president at that time. And of course subsequently became president, and all kinds of other events happened. So, for me, a lot of my leadership skills and a lot of what I've done as a leader was fostered through nursing, and in particular the Nurses Union, because that was one organization that really supported women and supported women in so many ways to learn leadership. And, not just here locally, but we went to all kinds of conferences and labor schools, and, and even internationally, we traveled, we were supported to do that. So for me, that was a real proving ground and a real inspirational, sort of time in my life to learn how to lead and what it meant to lead and what leadership looks like and what it does not look like, right? So, coming from that kitchen, in Caribbean, Newfoundland, and my grandmother was a lay midwife. She delivered out and handled babies. She never had any formal education that I know of, and she couldn't read and write. So from going from that to myself being a registered nurse, my sister was an LPN for many years. You could just kind of see through the generations of women. So for me, coming from a labor background, I love the footage of the women marching and singing. So when you have been a part of that movement, you understand that unless you've been a part of a movement like that, where you're marching and you're singing and you're working towards a common cause, a common goal, there's such power in that. And I really think that's how those women, they knew what to do because they knew how to speak to women, and they understood women's place in the world. A lot of the propaganda in World War I was aimed at the mothers because they needed the mothers to give their sons permission to go and sign up and go to the war. So you look at the posters, recruiting posters, all kinds of newspaper ads and all of that from that period of time. It was aimed deliberately because they knew they had to have the mothers. They didn't want them to vote, right? But they knew their power and they understood what role they had in their families. And in fact, as the war went on, the war that was only supposed to last till Christmas went on and on and on, and they needed more soldiers to go and replace the ones that had been killed and maimed and disabled. They understood where to direct that. So many lessons, I think, for us to learn, but for us to relearn and for us to remember in this historical time. You know, if we look at world events today, you know, what did they do back then? Well, what they did was, you know, work together across so many lines for a common goal. And I think this is how, you know, I hope that's how we're going to look back through history and say, well, that's how they did it then. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's do what they did. And they taught us so much in that way, really and truly. There's so much for us to learn. And so as we start to kind of bring our events to a close, I just want to do some thank yous, and then we're going to sing along, and I'm going to phone some friends. I'm going to call some friends to come up and then help us sing Bread and Roses. And I really can't help but reflect on all these women and their fortitude and their ingenuity. And, you know, I think about Grace Sparks. I just recently read the biography of Grace Sparks. By God, what was she made of? You know, she just kept on going. And Joe Small numerous times, you know, he demanded she be fired from the Daily News. And her editor didn't fire her, and the owner of the paper didn't fire her, and she kept on writing. I think about Dr. Stella Burry. Where would we be without the Stella Circle today? She's the person who started that organization, her foundational work with the poor, with people who had nothing, you know, and she got the money and she started those very first programs. I think about the Mercy Sisters and the Presentation Sisters, and part of their legacy, of course, is the gathering place. You know, that we wouldn't have the gathering place. That's a part of their legacy, is the gathering place. I think about all kinds of people. Most recently, you know, Debbie Hamlin has passed away. You know, what a wonderful person who, you know, was a leader and worked so hard. And, you know, for any of the politicians in the room, Leela's here. You know, Sheila is the deputy mayor of St. John's. My hat's off to you. That's a tough life, you know. And you have the strength, and you want to do that public service. And lots of times, boy, there's no thanks in that. And Her Honor, who was also obviously a political person at one time. You know, just to want to do these roles, because it takes a lot out of you. But as a woman, I think, I got to tell you, I think it takes a lot more. I think about Hazel Newhook, Diane Whalen, Yvonne Jones, who's going to be stepping down now soon. I think about women in Labrador, Elizabeth Panashaway. You know, what a leader in that community. What a person who really, really made sure that through her life's work, that all those traditions were preserved and passed down. I think about mayors, you know, of towns, Sheila Fitzgerald, Dale Colburn. I think about, all these women who have worked so hard, who have, you know, really, and we probably won't say their names today, but what a legacy they've left for their communities, you know, little tiny communities, whether it's the school council, the community council, or the library board. You know, we really, really, and I also think about the men who supported them. Let's not leave the men out. I know there's not a whole lot of men here today, but you know, I've been very fortunate to have a life partner who's been very supportive of me. And many of these women had that, and they were very fortunate to find a partner, you know, who was supportive of them and who helped the cause, whatever way that might have been. Even if it was just stay home, watch the youngsters for a while, so their partner could go and do the work. So I don't want to forget that. I want to thank everybody who helped put this together today. I want to thank their honors for having us here today. It's been a privilege to be here. I want to thank the Government House staff who have been so wonderful to our organization as we drove Pam Osborne, not Ramon, I'm sure, with all the emails. And of course, our tellers here today, Thierry and Mary and Anita. And I want to, some of our board are here and some of our programming committee. I want to thank our volunteers. Some of our volunteers are in the room, so thank you. Thank you, Gracie. for our live stream. And thank you to our online audience as well as everybody who has attended. It's been a fabulous audience. And I hope you've been able to hear the second half a bit better than the first half. So now I'm going to phone my friends, and we're going to have Anita, and we're going to have Cassandra Ingram, who is a grade 11 student at Gonzaga High School. She's an aspiring songwriter and storyteller and singer. And Catherine Reid, who is a past president, she's a multimedia artist, but also a past president of St. John's Storytelling, come up. And I think the Government House staff are going to distribute the lyrics of Bread and Roses to everybody, because we have copies for everybody. It's a participatory, sort of a thing. It's a sing-along. But I'm going to ask Anita to come up now and lead us, and Catherine's going to bring up our little pitch pipe and give us our note. And we're going to sing Bread and Roses now as soon as the lyrics get passed out. And then I think at the end, Her Honor is going to just want to pull up and have a word. On up Cassandra, on up Catherine. Okay, and we're going to let Anita take the mic. We're just passing out the lyrics here. And if you know at home, if you know Bread and Roses, please sing along. We'd love to have your voice. Anita, do you want to come up?
Nobody's on me.
Are you sure?
You stay on the mic.
Okay, sure. We're waiting for people online. Okay.
You can join us.
Please join us.
Please do.
Please do. We are just going to give you some leadership. That's all. Okay.
As we go marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 mil of spray, are touched with all the radiance that the sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we go marching, marching, we battle for men, for they are in this struggle, and together we shall win. Our days shall not be sweated, from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we go marching, marching, unnumbered women dead, go crying through our singing their ancient call for bread. Small art and love and beauty, their trudging spirits new. Yes, it is bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we go marching, marching, we're standing proud and tall, for the rising of the women means the rising of us all. No more the drudge and idler, tend that toil while wandering poses, but the sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we go marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 mil of spray, are touched with all the radiance that the sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. Bread and roses, bread roses.
Thank you for that help with that singing, that lovely singing. My goodness, what lovely singing this afternoon at Government House. And now, Your Honor, if you want to come up and give us a few closing words.
Thank you so much, Karen, for doing a wonderful afternoon for us, for the education, the sharing, and for lifting us up, for raising us all up today. And let's keep talking about it. And I'm hoping somebody in the room will start making these, vote for women. Yes, I think they're fabulous. I'd just like to share with you that this week I've been invited to speak at the UN as a panel member. And I will be speaking about women and girls and leadership and education and all those important pieces that were threaded right through the history of what we heard today, and how the women with the education and the public speaking capacity and the literature and the research were sharers of that information. And they raised other women up. They bridged the barriers between urban and rural, rich and poor, and mostly the religious groups. And I think that was said very clearly at a funeral I was at on Saturday, talking about the particular person that love knows no boundaries or borders. And I think what we saw was the love of women for each other, for their families, for the public health, and that's what really made it happen for all of us. So I just wanted to share that with you. I'm very honored. I'll do my best to do you proud and to raise women up for what we've all learned from those wonderful women that went before us. So before you leave today, we're having a little reception, a cup of tea, and as one of our Indigenous partners said one time at a meeting, it takes 100 cups of tea to build trust. And it is so true. So we're working on that. I think we're up to about, 50 or 60. So I think that's an important part of the whole process. And so have a cup of tea and a sweet. But before you leave, I hope you take a moment to go to the room next door, the Cochrane Room, to see the beautiful setup of women's art and history that we have. And I'm very proud today and ask Sheila O'Leary to stand up, because Sheila, your piece is out there today, front and center, and we're so proud of that in this wonderful world. And I also want to send a shout out to Kathy Hicks, who's doing another show this year, which will highlight in one of her programs, one of her dinner theaters, pieces of the very movement by the suffragists, the suffrage movement. So I think that's important, and I hope we continue to talk about it, and I so look forward to the unveiling of the Armine Gosling statue. I think that will be a day for us, and I hope we're able to march there and maybe march back here and reenact it. Just think this room was full of women from the WPA cutting materials and making shirts and pajamas and sending it off to people. It was such an industry by the women. When women pull together, anything and everything is possible. So thank you very much. And now I'd ask Pam, if you wouldn't mind, or Adele, or Jennifer, to come forward. We have a little token of appreciation for our tellers today. Can you hear me, Margaret?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Okay. Okay, so if I could.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy, and thank you for coming to your house. Have a great day.
Could rise for the departure of their honors, please. Thank you very much. You're all very welcome to enjoy the reception. Thank you.